You might think the biggest bankruptcy ever is the entire nation of Zimbabwe. But to that I'd say, how dare you? It's a wonderful country full of lovable mythical creatures like Bigfoot and Robert Mugabe. And anyway, countries don't count. Organizations, however, do. When an organization goes bankrupt, it can change the world overnight. Entire economies can be put at risk, powerful billionaires can lose everything, and countless people can be thrown into unemployment. But on the bright side, they do make for some interesting stories. So with that in mind, here are the biggest bankruptcies ever. When it comes to ranking the biggest bankruptcies, there are different categories to look at, with the two most important being personal and corporate. Corporate bankruptcies are the most devastating, often leading to many personal bankruptcies. The two biggest corporate bankruptcies so far both occurred in 2008, a time when markets globally were in the grip of a massive financial crisis. A crisis especially felt in America, where the unemployment rate doubled, housing prices fell 30%, and the stock market fell almost 60%. Countless businesses of all sizes collapsed, one of which was Washington Mutual. It was a massive banking company. In fact, it was America's largest saving and loan bank. As the financial crisis was caused by banks like Washington Mutual giving away reckless loans unlikely to be repaid, few people were sympathetic to its owners. The bank was 100 years old, and thanks to its trustworthiness grew steadily and gradually over a century from a tiny institution. People used to call Washington Mutual the friend of the family, as it was a safe and cautious institution. But then something changed. In 1990, Cary Killinger became CEO. His vision was to transform the bank into what would more accurately be called a loan company. In his own words, he hoped to build it into the Walmart of banking that would give out loans to those other banks wouldn't go near. And so, tasting the potentially massive profits, they began loaning money to basically anyone to ask. This gave huge growth to Washington Mutual, and by 2007 they held assets worth almost $328 billion. Their new strategy was, by all accounts, an enormous success, until the outbreak of the financial crisis, at which point people began desperately withdrawing money from dodgy banks. Washington Mutual was ground zero of stupid bankers giving risky loans to morons. In 9 days, $16.7 billion was withdrawn by clients, and the entire company collapsed. It remains the biggest bank failure in human history, and possibly alien history also, although that's difficult to confirm. By Earth standards, the fall of Washington Mutual was eclipsed only by the fall of Lehman Brothers, whose bankruptcy was double its size. The name Lehman Brothers has become synonymous with bad practices in banking, similar to Enron in the energy business, or Logan Paul here on YouTube. The Lehman Brothers was, as you'll be shocked to hear, founded by three brothers called Lehman. Born in 1820s Germany, they moved to Alabama, where they established a small cotton trading business. Over the next century and a half, their firm grew to become one of the world's biggest investment banks. Fast forward to the lead up to the financial crisis. Lehman Brothers had over 26,000 employees and assets of almost $700 billion. It was led by a man called Dick Fuld, who on top of having the worst name ever was notoriously aggressive. His nickname was the Gorilla, and today he's the poster boy for corporate psychopaths. As the financial crisis unfolded, he managed to stay on as CEO of Lehman Brothers, while leaders of other banks were forced to resign. It turns out Lehman Brothers were bad at investing, which isn't great for an investment bank. Borrowing 44 times the amount of money they actually had, they bought up massive amounts of real estate. When the crisis hit and real estate value tanked, no one wanted to buy up all this land, and they had a real disaster on their hands. So their investments turned out to be a disaster, and they simply didn't have enough money to survive the crisis. The government refused to bail out Lehman Brothers, and no other company was able to buy them out. They simply had no options left and were forced to declare bankruptcy. But this was just the beginning. As the largest bankruptcy in history, it caused a domino effect of financial disasters globally. Many think the collapse of Lehman Brothers is what turned the financial crisis of 2008 into a global recession, and that it came close to bringing down the entire economy of the world. This really didn't go down well. Dick Fuld went from being a wealthy man to having a net worth of negative 100 million, thanks to vengeful lawsuits. So that's the story of history's largest bankruptcy, which coincidentally was completely avoidable, just as most bankruptcies are. At the start of this video, I dismissed the idea of a country going bankrupt, but the truth is some countries really have. I think the most interesting of these is Argentina. In 2001, Argentina was forced to default on loans totaling $100 billion, following many years of prosperity. The problem is that despite Argentina being a G20 state and having South America's second biggest economy, they keep falling into financial crises. Government spending in Argentina is enormous. They spend more than they can afford to. The benefit of this is a high employment rate. The downside is they don't have enough to pay the wages of so many. Their solution is to take loans from foreign countries. This works well at first, but over time they inevitably increase spending even more, meaning they are constantly less able to repay loans. This of course makes foreigners less willing to loan money to Argentina. With less loans they had two options. Either they lay off huge numbers of government employees, or they print more money. They went with the latter, which in turn devalued their currency, which in turn made foreigners less willing to invest, which in turn meant even more money needed to be printed. It was a downward spiral leading only to national bankruptcy, and it looks like Argentina, as well as a few other countries, are again heading towards the same trap. The main lessons here are not to print money and to not be a bank, or something along those lines.